everyone. Welcome to another Shimejito talk. We are going to a very interesting topic. The goal of these conversations is really to bring forward and turn visible all the work and the knowledge that we already have to help make sense of these times that we are living and maybe create the solutions that we are looking for. Today we have as a guest a very special friend and colleague, Nuno Silva. Nuno is an educational activist, a facilitator, a consultant. Nuno, as a dedicates his professional and personal life, I would say, to regenerate cultures. He has a large experience in terms of designing and directing several programs in international organizations such as the United Nations, Young Forums, the Portuguese President Office, and to name a few. He also has been a part in many movements and cooperative movements. But I think that I should stop and invite our guest, and he's the best person to talk about himself. So let me invite Nuno. Nuno, where are you? You are here.
Hi, Njiza.
Hi, Nuno. Welcome. So good to have you here.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you for accepting. There's a part on your presentation that I didn't mention because I wanted to ask you. I love it. I know you are graduated in economy, but you present yourself as a recovered economist. I don't know. Please tell us about it.
Well, you know, when I was 18, I basically decided to study economics because I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do in life. I felt a bit without purpose. Everything looked bad around me. So I just thought, maybe if I go and if I study economics, I'll have the money to do whatever I want in the future. And in the process, I find out for once that the narrative of what is economy taught in most universities around the world, including the one I've studied in the University of Algarve, is very narrow-minded and is like a monolithic way of thinking about economy. So when I later on started to look to other thinkers around different ways of thinking about economy, Schumacher or the economists that worked with Gandhi in India, I really found like, whoa, this is another world, you know. So it was really, in a way, I think I spent the part of my life after graduating, unlearning and unpacking a lot of the things I have learned before.
Wow, what a journey. Still in the journey.
Yeah, still. I hope for a long time still.
Yeah, there's no level of mastery. There's this sentence, I don't recall who said it. It's a constant pick it up and let it go. Pick it up and let it go. So the topic for today is regeneration. So how can we move towards more healthy and regenerative cultures? And the first question that I have, because it's when we speak about regeneration, my immediate thought, my conditioned mind, so takes me immediately to my body, probably to biological regeneration. So the first question, how can you help us to make sense? How do you put regeneration when you are speaking about our human systems and our institutions and our world and our economy, etc., etc.?
That's a great question. Perhaps I'll talk a bit like how I came to this place, because I used to work. So after I end up my story with economics in the beginning of this millennia, actually, I was very involved with youth movements around Europe, and very inclined to think like, what are the capacities, the abilities we need to develop as human beings to participate more fully in the co-creation of society and of the future we would like to bring to life. Obviously, already thinking that we are in a different situation now than the one that gave origin to the educational systems we are in. So that has led me on a very long quest, the whole decade of the whole first decade, the last decade, on like thinking what kind of competencies and how we can develop them, thinking a lot about agency, like thinking that no matter what you do, your presence in the planet has an impact. And so you take part, even when you choose not to do anything. And so we're always in this situation of having to choose. And I feel like most people around us today have no agency or feel they are stripped of the capacity to influence and to determine their future and the future of the society they live in. And I wanted to challenge that. So I work a lot on that. But then when I went to work in Timor with adult education, and I start to see like really the meeting of the modern world with the kind of traditional society, I also started to think, well, just working on the human aspects, it's an ongoing feeding of the narrative that humans are separate from nature. In those times, I was working with sustainable development a little bit in working with young people and with communities, but I felt like it's already too late. Well, for once, it's already too late because the things we set in motion in the last decades are now, some of the impacts of the things we made in the 80s are now starting to be felt. Like, for instance, if you see the decalage of impacts on the ocean temperature and things like that, now the effects are starting to be felt of things that were done in the 80s. So I started to think like, to sustain is actually not a good idea, because to sustain means we're trying to hold things, to hold things as they are. So that's one way of thinking about it that for me doesn't work when we start to go deeper into how life works, because life is an ongoing perpetual movement, and so it doesn't make sense to think that the way to go forward is to keep the conditions as much as possible to sustain our ways of living. So I started to think, well, what is the ways nature works? Nature is always working in this dynamic relationship of the diversity of life and the context life is emerging in, and in that dynamics, it's ongoing regenerating. So we living systems live, grow, decay, die, and create conditions for new life to come. And so that there's a way to think about it that's like, what is it that we need to do and what kind of systems we need to build that are nourishing this natural way of creating the conditions that constantly generate new possibilities for life to evolve. And that's like, we've been too separate from that for too many generations. We still have many, mainly indigenous communities who still keep that wisdom in place of how you can be in a deep relationship with an ecosystem, with the nature you are embedded in a way that actually serves life. Because actually many of those indigenous communities, they even developed ways of relating and intervening in nature that enhance the capacity of nature to generate more life. So it's not like the idea that we need to either put humans aside, and let nature, well, nature will do its own work, but we can tune ourselves to a way of being in relationship with nature that can actually enhance the natural system's capacity to regenerate. So meaning to create new conditions, higher order conditions of complexity, so that life generates more complex, more diversity in a dynamic balance. It looks
kind of strange.
Yeah.
As I listen to you and recalling my 15 years in corporate world, I was having, and I maybe some of our listeners also have these questions. It's just like this. Okay, I can completely resonate with what you were saying in terms of the need of reconnecting with nature. And in some way, we may see on the last years with this sustainability trend that this is coming to our minds and to our institutions and to our management, because I particularly like to focus on how do we bring all this knowledge and all these new practices to our institutions and the way we manage. But in some way, I have this sense that you look at, I need to be in relation with the nature. I need to take into consideration my impacts in nature, but there's still a sense of separation. I'm not nature. Something because and when I listen, the indigenous, but I'm not an indigenous community. I'm a corporation. So.
We were indigenous once, but we lost that. I mean, we Western societies have lost that connection. It's hard to find it. It's still maybe possible in some cultures, and even in ours, it's possible if we go to meet people living in villages and still having these old ways that are much more embedded in the ecosystems to live with. But I think we need to kind of look at this from a deep time perspective. I told you in another conversation today that I had I made an interview to a lady called Elizabeth Sartori's earlier this year, and she's a worldwide expert on biology and evolution. And she told me a very interesting story about how life evolved in the planet, and that we spent basically when life emerged in the planet, the first 4 billion years were just basically bacteria struggling in the environment for resources, eating all the sugar they could until they almost kind of met extinction. And in that moment, they figured out that they could collaborate, and they organized in little cooperatives that we call cells. So they created unicellular organisms that invented somehow photosynthesis, which was a major evolution in the sense that they could be much more autonomous in their way of, exploring the planet. And then they spend another 2 billion years fighting each other for resources, until they almost terminate, they almost got extinct, and they managed to again organize in cooperatives and create multicellular organisms, of which we are one of the huge diversity of multicellular organisms in the planet. So I think we are in that stage of, young, juvenile, competitive stage, and we are invited to move to a collaborative, mature stage in human development, which means that we need to understand that our generation grew up in this world of separation. So we need to unpack a lot of the things that we think, a lot of ways we think, and a lot of ways we see the world, because they are getting us stuck in these ways of seeing and in a lack of imagination. So I would say we were talking about what kind of how to work with this, and one of the things I find out was, after working many years with the human factor, I thought I need to learn more about how nature works. So one of the things in my movement towards permaculture and these things that was very striking was, before you intervene in a territory, you need to observe. So that's was a very important aspect for me. The idea in permaculture is, before you go and you make your farm or you make a design for a place, you need to at least for 1 year observe it, so that you can see it as it moves throughout the year, and see all the elements, how they relate with each other. So you observe with the intention to see relationships and then start to see patterns. So see that, for instance, in a part of the year, the sun is going passing in this direction, in other part goes in that direction. In a part of the year, the winds are more, predominant from this direction. The water, when it rains, goes in these ways. And then you start to really understand the place. And you can start to understand what is it that the place wants to express. So you work with it in partnership. You don't work with it like a human, the human anthropocenic way of thinking that you go there and you intervene, otherwise nature will be lost and, you know, lifeless. So that was a big shift, because that also involved that I started to work in myself on putting myself in perspective, meaning that when I'm observing something, either it's a natural landscape or is a living system like an organization, I need to always keep myself in check so that I don't project my own, you know, mind frames into the situation, that I actually allow the situation to show itself to me. So it's a different way of seeing and looking for meaning. So you don't look for huge quantity of knowledge, you know, because we live obsessed with knowledge. Like intervention in a system is collection of data, but it's not about that. It's engaging with the system, being in relationship with it and observing, keeping us in check so that we don't project ourselves in the system, but allow the system to show itself to us. And that means having a sort of collaboration with either a landscape, the community, and all the elements that are kind of living, co-creating that reality, you know.
I can't avoid you, because every time I hear the invitation to spend time observing, to identify patterns, I always have this voice that tells me for many years, yeah, the big challenge that we have, it's the time to do that, because time is money. I think time is structure. You can do whatever you want inside that structure, but in our society, time is money. And in face of all the red lights that we have, and currently with this COVID and all the economic downturn that we are expecting, what we are seeing around being in our public institutions, being private initiatives to create solutions, it's readiness to act. So what kind of invitation or promise, I know there's no magic formulas, but the ROI, the return on investment of observing. So what's the return on investment of observing? How can we bring this invitation?
I find amazing that you're doing that question, and I know it's not an innocent question in the context we are in, because we basically that is happening. This virus, this virus that emerged in the end of last year in China is forcing us to slow down. And although we seem more busy in online and different demands, just look at the world out there. I mean, nature is doing its own work. So actually, the human, let's say, fugitivity to home is allowing many things to happen. I think this is going to have a huge impact on us. And I don't want to minimize the suffering that this is bringing. I think actually that we need to compost that and honor that pain and suffering that is being originated in this, towards not going back to normality as we were 4 months ago, and actually learn a lot with this. So I would say, for me, when I see a lot of people around trying to fix things and rushing into solutions, and I think it's a moment also to observe deeply and to engage in a dialogue, a deep listening about what is this virus trying to tell us. Because I was just sitting a couple of weeks ago with data around like how many children per year die of starvation, and is a number much more gigantic than the number of people who are dying supposedly from this virus. So, and we haven't done anything with that, just because I think one of the ways we think about it is like it's more complex to deal with that issue of malnutrition and poverty, because that involves questioning all the things we are embedded in our lives. Is much more easy to, fight against, to have the narrative of fighting against this invisible being that is actually not alive. It's kind of dead. It's strange, a virus, right? But it's like inviting us and deeply affecting. It's more easy to put a narrative of fight and war against this thing. And I think that there's a shift there to understand that we have everything in our hands, and actually our problem is really in many cases of that we grow up in a system that has been developed, that we all take part in its development, but it incentivizes sociopathy and extraction and ways that are against life. So it's a matter of time for us to continue, if we continue on this path to do self-destruction. So this is a moment to really question where do we want to be in the end of this journey, or of this transition, or of this disruption, or this birth. We are suffering the pains of birth, I would say. So it's important that we start to engage in that dialogue and open our imagination to other possibilities. Otherwise, we get stuck. If we think, for instance, that at this moment with this crisis, there's people with a lot of money who are incentivized to use that money to invest in actions, for instance, in bonds and stuff, on companies who are now going down in their value. For instance, travel companies, flight airlines. We know that airlines are going to be needed in the future. So there's people now putting money on buying stocks of air companies because they know they're going to gain a lot of money, because now it's very cheap to buy those bonds. But that's the way the system incentivizes us to behave, which is totally against, like, say, okay, I have this amount of money that I could allocate to really look for long-term regenerative solutions that generate life. So we are stuck, and I think we cannot wait for politicians and people who are close to what we consider in our ways of thinking centers of power, and discover that they're actually other places of power in our communities, in our local places within us, from which we can start to act in ways that disrupt the system, because our ways of understanding change are also in a way blinded by this idea of linearity, that we need to go up the chain of power in order to change.
Yeah.
That maybe we need subtle things that we start to do in our lives allow for space for something new to emerge later. And that's what we need to also start to develop, this vision of things in movement and not things stopped. I told you in another conversation, like I can work today on regeneration because I've done a lot of choices in my life and took a lot of options that allowed me now to maybe connect things which 10 years ago or 5 years ago I was not able to connect. So it took me that journey. And so the choices we make every moment open up possibilities for us and for the systems we enact. So we're also talking about...
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I know that you have a training to give, and I want to get the much knowledge from you as possible. And I'm going to try to blend all the questions. So I have questions here in terms of your thinking about the data showing the rates of pollution going down after the corona. And I also have questions. This one I cannot bond. I ask you to reply directly. But I have another question about something around because questions pass. I cannot fix them. But something about the increasing the possibility of during this lockdown to be more innovative in terms of creating more sustainable solutions. So my question is, because in our previous conversations, you told me that we are not in time, we lose the opportunity to be sustainable, now we need to be regenerative. So I would like you to introduce this in this answer, if possible, and reinforce the agency, because what I hear from you, it's each one of us, we should not be waiting for the institution. Here in Portugal, we have Sebastian, our King Sebastian, that is going to return. So I think in some way we are always waiting for this Sebastian. So picking up in this lockdown, this notion there's no time to be sustainable, but to be regenerative, and this agency, what are our possibilities of creating solutions?
So I think on a very personal scale, we need to be aware that we are always moving towards our way of meeting reality is always moving towards things that we like and that give us pleasure, and away from things that give us pain. And we need to be more observing that dynamic so that we don't get stuck in avoiding and running away from things, and instead start to look towards what is it that we want to move towards, what is it that we want to bring to our lives, to the lives of people around us. If you ask that, if you start to explore that with other people, we would figure. I trust deeply that most of the human species is very aligned in we want to have more meaningful lives, be more connected with each other, have more time. So that's an important movement. And then if we start to look like, what is it that I can do today to you stop hearing me? Okay. Yeah. So what is it that I can do today to give one step in my capacity to move towards affirming and bringing to life the things I believe deeply and I want deeply, and then help others around me to do the same, to move also in getting more able. And in that way, we start to help our systems to be more able also to perform their roles. And then think like each one of us has a unique role and potential in the places we inhabit. So each one of us comes to life with a very unique gift, with a very unique potential to explore and to put out there. So we need to work towards finding that in ourselves and helping others to find it, and move beyond the fear of avoiding being, abused by others, and this kind of mentality that evolved in us because of a competitive society.
Or I don't have a degree, I'm not an expert, or that.
So to really, and to start to openly talk about our fears and to start to talk about what really blocks us, why we feel blocked in certain things, because others can help us in that process. And then think like, what is the vocation, what is the potential of the teams I'm working with, of the projects I'm involved, like, is it the project the final purpose, or is it the project has a role in helping the most proximate system we are intervening to have a evolutionary role in the other systems it makes part of. So if I'm working on my neighborhood, how can I help my neighborhood perform the role it has within the context of the city it's in? Or if I'm in a valley, what is the function of the role of that valley, not the function, the role of that valley within the ecosystem it's part of? And then we start to really evolve to a more living way of thinking about it. And that needs that we look to the past, to the present, and start to imagine what kind of future this place or this group of people or this community wants to, move towards.
You awake this. At first, I don't know again who told it, but at first they will walk of your dreams, then they will combat, they will ridicule you, and at the end they will say that you are right. So when listening to you, it's really about to connect. There's also, when connecting with you, are mentioning the investors that were betting on the 5 companies. Those, what I'm listening, it's people operating for a very narrow sense of self. So the self is me and my closest ones. And when you expand this sense of self and reconnect with your community and with the nature, yourself gets bigger. So your decisions also are guided to serve the larger. I have another question that I want to. It's about do you believe that the stock market, searching for profit? This is very prophetic answer, but I know you can answer. Do you think that the stock market is very focused on generating only profit is going to change? Do you think there's a chance that in this context, we can start thinking in other forms to direct our investment? And
yeah, I think it's already happening. It's already happening. And of course, this is not going to be a black or white kind of thing. We need to start to be able to hold paradoxes and, polarization of things. So you have a lot of capital now moving to green and to invest on sustainability and also regeneration. And of course, because we grow up in a system of separation, there's going to be people wanting to allocate money, but still wanting immediate return on investments and things like that. So we will need to keep experimenting in ways that allow, because that's another thing. In complex living systems are all complex. To move in that space, you can only change the system operating in it and seeing what results from your from your participation in it. So we need to, it's a moment of experimenting and seeing what works. I see a lot of space of potential in the meeting of technology with these distributed networks that allow for sovereignty of individuals to be coming to a place of collaboration and generating new possibilities for us in all spheres of life. Production of food, energy, management of the commons and of the ecosystems in a way that is generating life. So even management is not the right word, but being in a relationship that is generative. And hopefully many people are already, or crucial people are already starting to come from the space of capital and say the way we've been funding and the cycles of funding and all the way we've been thinking about this is wrong. So for instance, I'm working with a few foundations who are in a different way to relate with people to say, we trust in what you are doing, we give you seed money and see what you do with it. And if you're going in the direction of the kind of values and things we want to bring, we want to feed in, then we'll give you more money. And then it's going to be generating a relationship that is much more life generating of possibilities,
Thank you for bringing it, because and what you just brought, and I hope our listeners are paying attention. There's another world wanting to be brought to life, and it's already happening. So we are not really restricted to this old version.
Njiza, let me say one thing, because this is important. One thing I've noticed is we need to take care of our biases towards the places of power, because when we have honest conversations in particular instances with people that we considered are in places of power and we would imagine that they were not being open to anything, we discover that we can find allies and support and people to work with where in places we didn't figure out before. And I think this crisis, this virus, is creating more cracks in the system, more spaces where we can come in and find new collaborators, new partners, new allies in this work. So don't treat anybody like the enemy. We are all in this. It's just that we are in different stages of capacity and of ableness to be dealing with these possibilities, with this potential. And so we need to be really tending to each other, even those we can consider to be the enemy, and say that they are all humans and they are always all moving through this experience in ways that also are difficult for them. So what
you just read my mind. I was about to ask you that, because on this dance of polarities, and I would like if you could give us a brief overview of the forces that are in place in these movements of trying to bring forward the new and regenerate, and also give us a little highlight about the levels of work, of regenerative work. What are the levels of work, and how to do this dance between the old, the new, the eco and the capitalism, people oriented.
Well, I would say be prepared to be broken, to be undone, to be unfinished. This is there's no final point that you need to reach. Life is an ongoing, an unfolding journey. So one thing is, we need to start to work by ourselves, and in that space I think there's always shadow and light. There's always things that we are good at, things that we are not so good, things that we like in ourselves, things that we don't like, things we want to move towards, things we avoid. So we need to integrate that in a way that is generative, which means that we need to hold those tensions and not try to exclude, because the more we try to exclude something in us, the more force it gains. Like if you focus on the light, like people these days with new ages think positive and all this, and you kind of neglect all these feelings and emotions that are part of the human experience and that inform us about what is important for us, then they'll get more furious and they dominate you. So always mistrust people who come saying, I'm full of light and there's only light and look at me, how beautiful I am. Be very wary of those people. Be real, be human, and you'll see that others will be more human with you also. And then think like, be imperfect, be undone. This is no time for, you know, like for having your shit together. This is time to really say, shit hit the fan, we need to deal with our shit, and that's the compost we need to do. So nothing in life is useless. That's another mentality of human domination. So compost and then help others compost. So we need to work on these three levels: on ourselves, with each other, on helping others who are working with us to be more able to develop their capacity, to keep their evolutionary path. And then through that, think how we can contribute that our systems, our neighborhood, our city, our farm is more able to perform its role in the larger systems it's part of. So always have that think of nested systems and dynamic relationships between them. And that's just like being really systematic in terms of decentering ourselves and looking at reality as much as it is as possible, and observing systematically with practice, seeing patterns of the relationships, and then, you know, be real, be vulnerable, be yourself, be open to fail and continue to learn.
You know, there's a myth that people think, oh no, I'm not vulnerable. Everyone is vulnerable. So
yeah.
It's just vulnerability. It comes from being exposed to uncertainty, to things that you do not control. So, and people paint it as a very weakness, but no, it's a reaction. Nuno, and now I will ask your help to wrap up our conversation. And so my notes, my first question was about what the hell does regeneration has to do with society, with systems, with corporations, and you take us to the fact that we are not separated from nature. So start with that idea that there's something outside of us called nature, and we are something apart that inhabits nature. So and by adopting this, we can see ourselves as living systems with all the faculties and all the dynamics that exist in nature, and with whom we have a lot to learn. You also mentioned, when we spoke about sustainability and regeneration, that we lost the time to be sustainable, that what we are living today are the impacts of things that we made many years ago. You mentioned the 80s. Also, to work regeneratively, not the first step, but essential building block, it's before intervening, being in your family, being in your community, being in your corporation. Please observe what already exists there, how it behaves, what are the patterns that exist, and then start with that. And the starting is made in 3 levels. Start in yourself, then work with others, and by doing this, you bring a collective capacity to another level. Would you like to add up something more?
I would say that if you work with other people in a place with the intention to make it better, and you really go and observe what this place is trying to express, looking at the past history of the place and like what is the people living there, what are they thinking about it, and all this, you come to a potential of that place that if you find a appealing story, you know, people will be there. You'll find vitality in the system to move towards that direction, and then you just need to think about viability and if it's contributing to have the place arrive to a better place. With your intervention, you are in the road of regeneration. So that's what we are aiming for.
No, thank you so much. I'm just going to finish because you have a commitment, because I could stretch a little bit more.
Yeah, I would love to continue.
We were just starting. Thank you so much for sharing with us your journey, and all your findings, and to help us make sense of these times that we are living.
Yeah, I loved it. Thank you so much for inviting me, Njiza, and for everybody listen to us. We are in this together. I hope this is going to be a growing movement in Portugal. Let's do beautiful things together.
Let's do beautiful things. Next week, we are going to have another talk. This one is going to be available in our YouTube channel as the previous one. Next week, we are going to dive a little bit more into this learning with nature. Our guest is a biologist, but also a very dynamic person in terms of community building and helping bring a better future. So keep close to us. We will keep you updated on the next steps. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone. I hope you have enjoyed. Beijinho.
Bye. Beijinho. Bye-bye.